let me ask you a different question. Could God exist and us not like Him? Of course. I mean, God could be however He is. The existence of God is not predicated on Him being loving. We're very lucky that He is. But when we're looking at these evidences against God, all they do is disprove the God they've imagined. It doesn't disprove God. It's only an argument against the character of God. These are critiques on how they imagine God should be. But in order to judge God, you'd have to be God, right?
Yeah, God gave us free will.
God gave us free will. Thank goodness for that. So, okay, let's look at evil. Evil's complicated, right? We have all had grief in our lives. We've had pain and suffering. We've had loved ones get sick. People have died. We see things on the news that is horrific. We all know what this looks like, right? So what the atheist is doing is playing on our emotions and saying, how can a loving God allow this? You know, shake your fist at God. And too many Christians actually do this. And I know that's a real cheery start. That's just my introduction. So, okay, let's get into the meat of this. So we have to answer the question about evil. There's three questions we have to deal with. Does evil disprove God? Okay. Then we have to decide if it doesn't, is there a purpose in evil? Now that's a tougher one. And then if there is a purpose in evil, is there a remedy for evil? Those are the three questions we have to ask. And even an atheist has to ask these same questions. So, okay. First one I think is easy. I think we know that this is probably evil's going to point to God, but I'm going to go through it. I'm going to use Richard Dawkins. You guys know who Richard Dawkins is? Yeah. He's probably one of the most outspoken atheist biologists, although if you listen to him maybe 15 years ago and you listen to him now, his tune has changed dramatically. So I'm really talking about the 15-year ago Richard Dawkins. Today, his perspective is very different. He actually has claimed that he's a cultural Christian, which boggles my mind. But this is Richard Dawkins in the early 2000s, and he made a lot of money as was one of what they called the New Atheists. In his book, A River Out of Eden, he said, DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. It's often paraphrased that we dance to our DNA, right? So that's the atheist worldview in a nutshell. And he went on in another book, or I guess it's the same book, and he said this: in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces, genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky. And he goes through all these things down to the end, and he says, at the bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. So in the atheist, and this is well put from an atheist perspective, this is how they have to say it. There is no good, there is no bad, there is no purpose. That has to be their claim. Because if they claim anything else, well, they're stealing from my worldview. But then he wrote another book, and I'm not going to go all the way through it. I don't know if I put the quote in your handout, but he's talking about how repulsive the God of the Old Testament is, and all of his statements up here are moral judgments. And he just said there's no moral, no right and wrong, and then he judges God based on a moral standard that he doesn't have. And you'll see this happen a lot when we're arguing with an atheist or an agnostic. They'll give us their manifesto that this is what I believe in, and then they use our worldview to judge our worldview instead of their own, because theirs doesn't work. They don't have a standard in order to make the comparison. If you really are an atheist, you shouldn't care whether we believe something or not, because there's no purpose. So the fact that they come and argue with us already proves their view is false. But let's go further. Let's keep proving them false. So again, evil actually proves that God has to exist because I have to have a standard to compare to. in order to know what evil is. And I'll get to that in a little more detail. I'll come back to this. But at the very minimum, the fact that people can make a comparison of good and bad, there has to be a standard, and that standard has to be God. So evil actually does prove God must exist. Doesn't prove I like God yet, okay? But you can't get around the fact I have to have a standard of what good and bad is, and it has to come from outside of myself. So let's look at the second question. Why is there evil? This is not easy. This is not easy. The question is, can you imagine a purpose for evil?
Unless you know that it's not good.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. Well, I think maybe we should define evil. Let's define evil first, because we want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So, okay, maybe. Evil is the absence of goodness. You can look at a lot of definitions, but I think this is the best definition. We know what good is, and we know what not good is. Not good is often what people define as evil. It's not good. It's the absence of goodness. Do you guys agree with this definition? This is the best one I can find. Most philosophers will agree with this. And let me demonstrate how this type of a perspective looks. This is a rusty old car. If I take all the rust out of the car, what do I have? I got a nice car. What happens if I take all the car out of the rust? You got that. You got nothing. Rust actually needs the metal of the car in order to exist. I know that's overly simplified. I'm a chemist, so I could go into more detail. But in general, rust is an imperfection on the perfection of the car. How about this? Shadow. What's a shadow? Christopher?
So basically, your shadow is something that is the mud.
Something blocking out.
So yeah, would it bother you if I told you a shadow is nothing? What happens if I take away the light? Well, there's no shadow. The object and the light are still there. You just can't see it anymore without the light, right? You have to have light in order to have a shadow. Another one, sunshine. What happens if the sun's not there? Then you can't have sunshine. We have a lot of things in our language that are describing the absence or the inclusion of something, but they're not something in themselves. One of my favorites, cold. You know cold's not a thing? Have you ever been cold? But it's really just a lack of heat. If you want to make something cold, you remove heat from it. Okay, you don't. It's a function of how much heat there is. I mean, I grew up in Nebraska. I know what cold is. I've been on the north slope of Alaska in February. You know the no-day days and all that stuff, and Finland and all kinds of places that are really cold. Okay, you're talking 50 below zero plus wind chill. But as a scientist, I know that's not cold. That's just a lack of heat, and it's a lack of a lot of heat actually. But evil works the same way. Evil is the absence of goodness, or it's taking away from goodness. Sometimes we refer to it as an imperfection on the goodness of God's creation. And we know bad things exist, right? I mean, disease and terrorism and war, famine, these things are terrible. We know this. Intuitively, we know that. But the question we have to ask, and that we often have to ask our atheist friends, is how do we know that? What's the standard at which we're determining something is bad? So, we're already 30 minutes in. We might be a little long today, sorry. We have to break evil down into parts, because we lump everything together, especially the atheists love to everything into evil. But there's really two major categories of evil. We have moral evil, that's the free will that Ray was talking about, and then there's natural evil. This is things that happen in the natural world. That would be disease and earthquakes and hurricanes and stuff like that. So, okay. Now, natural evil I always struggle with a little bit, because it's like we know all those things are going to happen. We choose to live in the path of those things, and then we want to complain when it happens. But we'll talk about it a little more. I really think we lump a whole bunch of things in the evil category, but it's really just bad. I think there are very few things that really meet the level of evil. Because what's bad for me might be good for somebody else. So is it evil for them when it's good for them? That's, if I go for an interview and there's only one position and I don't get it, that seems pretty bad to me, but somebody else gets it, it's pretty good for them. So we have to make sure that we're not overreaching our definition, and you'll see that atheists do that a lot. They want to lump all these things together to get those emotional responses from us. We want to kind of sift through so we can get to the bottom of what we're really talking about. We want to talk about the real things that are bad. So let's talk about natural evil first. Natural evil. If you're talking to an atheist that believes in naturalism, I would cross out the evil and just put ism at the end of their view for starters, because you don't have a basis for good or bad. And I don't know why a naturalist would even worry about natural evil, because they believe in nature. That's their whole principle. So should we blame naturalism for natural disasters? I mean, that's kind of what I feel like I would say to Richard Dawkins. It's like, you think earthquakes and hurricanes and all these things are so bad. Should we blame the evolutionist model? They believe nature is the center of everything. It doesn't work that way. That's equal level of scrutiny. That can't have it both ways. So I think we can throw out natural evil. I know diseases are bad. I know all those things, but that's the mechanisms that the world works on. To call them evil, we really don't have enough perspective. We can't see the big picture. And what is good for me might be bad for somebody else, and vice versa. That's just the reality. Even in the case of disease, I mean, perfect example is if I was to die, someone might live using my organs. So is it evil that I got a disease and died so someone else could live? So you can see how subjective these concepts can be. So okay, we'll go beyond that. So we'll get to where it really gets interesting, which is moral evil. Moral evil is doing bad to a fellow human, right? And it does come down to free will. We believe as Christians that we have the freedom to make bad choices. And sometimes those bad choices hurt other people. Okay? Now that does not make it comfortable to have this conversation. Sometimes it feels like they're innocents that are hurt by evil acts, but from somebody's free will being exercised. And we often hear the argument that the idea that these acts of evil are inconsistent with the omnipotent, perfectly loving, omniscient God, just like we heard in the beginning. These extreme bad things. What do you guys think? We're still in the introduction, by the way. Intent? Yeah. Well, I think let's narrow our gaze a little further. Let's go to what they often refer to as gratuitous evil. These are things that seem completely senseless. Okay? And I know we have kids, so I'm going to try to be careful with my language. But the Holocaust, we would say that was completely senseless violence, right? That's all under gratuitous evil. Now, the atheist would say there definitely exists intense suffering, which a God that's omnipotent, omniscient, and perfectly loving should have prevented without doing any harm to its creation. And it sounds really good, except I'm not God, so I can't make that call. I don't have enough perspective on it. And C.S. Lewis actually did a really good job of kind of putting an object lesson together for us. In Mere Christianity, he talks about, if you don't know C.S. Lewis's story, he fought in World War I, and he saw acts of violence and suffering, And he was angry at God and convinced of atheism until he dug into it because of his good friend, Mr. Tolkien, that wrote the Lord of the Rings. And he said, my arguments against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got the idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What I was comparing the universe with when I called it unjust. And it's a really good demonstration. How can you say something is gratuitously evil unless you have some idea what good is? So you have to have a standard that's outside of yourself. And I like this illustration.